So it's become a modern trend, Eamon. Before people come to court and they probably presume that they're going to go to prison. We've had a few of these cases now that people go up on social media and I suppose put in their excuses in advance, I suppose. We're speaking, of course, in connection with a guy you wrote a story about, Jamie Smith, who was ultimately convicted in connection with a major seizure of cannabis. And I suppose he gave a few sort of Instagram quotes in advance.
Yeah, well, I suppose he's one of these people who'll be close to being a digital native, I suppose, at this stage. He worked at a kind of a personal fitness trainer, so was well used to posting on his Instagram account and, and by all accounts was, very popular and very good at his job. But of course, like many of these drugs couriers, he found himself in financial difficulty at one point and was going to do a one-off job and was caught with 3.9 million worth of cannabis in a van.
Yeah.
So he's got 6.5 years sentenced last week, but he knew on the way in that this was going to happen. And I suppose he wrote a kind of a long post on his Instagram account before he went in.
See, it's a funny development, of course, because we used to see people before they came to court for serious offences, what they would do would be they'd shut down their Bebo account or whatever. So people couldn't take well, honestly, so people couldn't take pictures or whatever. And people have even said to me, "Oh yeah, I knew I was going to be done, so I shut down my Facebook account so people couldn't take pictures." But in recent times, and you've seen it particularly on TikTok, I saw 3 or 4 examples of it in recent days where people know they're coming to court and they do a TikTok kind of a bit of a mea culpa, bit of admission, but also maybe given a sort of from their angle, which is fair enough as well. It just shows you how social media changes the world. But tell us some of what Jamie Smith gave us.
Well, it's all your impression management, I think, as the cyber psychologists call it.
Yes.
And why not? It's your material to use. So, I mean, you can... Your personal story, your personal narrative. It's up to you to curate it whichever way you like.
Exactly. Put the spin on it. It's good for everybody.
And this is what Jamie Smith did. It's a reality. I've had to come to terms with a mistake I made that completely shifted the course of my life. But of course, he's trying to also show that this was a learning experience for him. It taught him that if anything, no mistake, no matter how big, has to define you. Now I know we might sound like we're having a little laugh at this, but in fairness, we're not. Look, I mean, it's there might be a certain amount of front in it. I'm sure anyone going into prison for the first time is nervous and worried about it. And there are people who are friends and they're dear to you, so you want to give them something to cling on to that you're not going in there and they don't needn't be worried. So I mean, he goes on like life throws some brutal lessons at you, but what I've learned in the hardest time you grow the most, you find strength you didn't know you had. And he also he talks about learning how to take accountability and to rebuild even when you live in the unknown. So obviously there's a whole uncertainty when you're waiting for a case to come. You're not really sure what's going to go on. So I mean, some people like their life stop or they want to drink or drugs or whatever, or it's difficult maybe to continue and to make plans while you have this kind of, an unfinished business of a date with a judge and a 3 million cannabis charge hanging over you. So, he's upbeat, and I think that's the way he always was. To anyone out there struggling, no matter how dark things are, no matter how heavy the weight feels, know that every single day is an opportunity to turn it around. You're stronger than you think, and that was his kind of, that was his approach. I think with a lot of his customers on his Instagram account before he got involved with this. I mean, and even like it even came out in the court case in Dublin Circuit Court. That when he was arrested by the guards, he gets into like, my job is what I love, helping people lose weight. I was just stupid. Have a look at my Instagram, JS Fitness. Yeah. And that was all in court, Now, and he's very much, a motivated, I think, kind of personal trainer. But unfortunately, he's going to be doing that from a jail cell for the next at least 4 years, I guess. Yeah,
because he gets a 6.5-year sentence. Now, obviously, 3.9 million euros worth of cannabis is a huge amount financially. I think that they have a breakdown day of 186 kilograms of cannabis herb and 291 bars of cannabis resin. So it's a huge amount of money, I suppose, caught up in all of that. Now, because of Ireland's laws, you have this minimum sentencing for drug offences. Basically, if you have more than 13,000 euros worth of drugs, in theory, you face 10 years in prison as a minimum. Judges depart from all of this, and Judge Martin Nolan, who people always talk about in various ways, has given him a 6.5-year sentence. In fact, he said, Judge Martin Nolan did say, "It seems he's a likable man. I have many, many letters on his behalf before me. I think that's the most lenient I can be." So he's looked at that 10-year sentence. I mean, people will say, well, 6.5 years for cannabis is a long time. Some people would say. Others would say you're involved in a multi-million euro criminal enterprise. 6 years isn't too long. Martin Nolan has said basically that because of some of the mitigation, that he's able to bring that 10 years down to 6.5. However, you'll always get people to point out other crimes where people walk free, and some of them by Judge Martin Nolan, who gets a focus of a lot of attention, but
well, he's a busy judge in a busy circuit court, unfortunately for him. But I mean, if anyone actually sits into any of these sentence hearings, what often doesn't really get reported because it's very boring and technical is how the judge structures the sentence. Now, in this case, we read, we weren't there. It was one of the agency reporters covered it for all the newspapers, and it briefly, what you mentioned there about the judge saying he seems like a nice guy. I've never seen so many letters. That would have been part of the sentence structuring. Now, the judge, when you're at any of these kind of cases, he'll say, well, look, the mandatory in this case in this for these charges is 10 years, and for this amount of judge, the guidelines go up to 15 years. Yeah. And he says, there's a man caught with 3.9 million. Yeah. So the mitigation would start, well, he's an early plead, so that's going to take something off. And then he'll go on and he'll say, so this arrives at a headline sentence of 8 years for Mr. So-and-so. Yeah. And then they'll continue on. And they'll say,
Jamie Smith in this case has no previous conviction, so that would be certainly something.
Yeah, and he'll continue, and he'll explain why there's 6 months coming off the headline sentence here, why there's a year coming off there, and all this counts in. So eventually they'll arrive at 6.5, and that was really to stop, in the past there would have been appeals, and judges don't want their sentencing to be appealed because it makes it look like they haven't done the job properly. If the Court of Appeal is going, you were too lenient, you were too strong on the sentence, too harsh. Yeah. So the judges are very much trying to get it right. And I mean, and they do actually have a little bit more freedom than some of the cases that we looked at recently in the UK that we're looking at. I mean, you have argument over, say, for instance, in England, where it was Ger Dundon was caught with weapons possession in London, there was argument over whether it was an A2 or an A1 offence, and therefore it would be an extra 3 months or 4 months. And it was very, very detailed. And you could see that the judges involved basically had a questionnaire they had to fill in before they arrived at their sentence. Yeah.
So I mean, that's exactly it. So the cannabis offences in I suppose the minimum or the mandatory sentencing was brought in. I think at the time the Gilligan gang was being investigated after the murder of Veronica Guerin, and there was an increased push for more lengthier sentences for drug offences. Now, but a lot of people will look at cannabis and say, well, what is the damage to on a moral or societal level, and then they will look at other sentencing, maybe given by Judge Martin Nolan or other people. The classic example, I suppose, is being possession of child abuse images, which is the offence is actually called child pornography. People use that term, child abuse images, now. So where a lot of people get suspended sentences, and people really look at that and think, that's morally repugnant, and it is. It's a horrible, grim, abusive crime that ultimately, as you trace it back, a child is damaged, and it's morally unconscionable. However, in a court, judges have to sentence people on the basis of precedent and how the offence is on the books. So it's a complex matter, isn't it?
I know it certainly is. And I mean, even with, like in Jamie Smith's case, it was clear he was working for a professional organised crime gang involved in serious drug dealing.
Yeah.
And these aren't people that settle disputes by going to a mediator and having a chat. Like, you know, they burn people's houses down, they point guns at people, they beat people up, they shoot people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's involved with, like, you know, some nasty people. Whether he knew them or not is you can argue is you know, it's not the point. I mean, like, the evidence in court was that it was an intelligence-led operation by the guards, and they were keeping some vehicles under surveillance, and Smith was one of these people then that was seen collecting the rented van from a gym in Finglas, and drove then up to Cavan, where he parked outside a pub. He got out of the van, spoke to another person who got into the van and drove away. He went to a nearby petrol station where he spent 30 minutes, presumably getting a cup of tea and a donut or something, and then he was driving back towards Dublin in the van. And when they pulled him over in the back roads, this, lo and behold, is 3.9 million worth of resin and herb were in the van. So, I mean, there was no doubt that this is organised crime. He was obviously at the lowest level. Like, he was in possession of a phone that showed he was getting directions about what route to take. So, I mean, he was absolutely controlled, I think, in that regard. But at the same time, you know, okay, he was saying, you know, he made a stupid mistake. It was a one-off payment. But also it's an insight into how these gangs operate, that they want a clean skin. They want somebody who doesn't have necessarily, who's going to attract attention because they have a criminal record if they spotted getting into a van or driving somewhere. So this guy was never going to, he was never going to pop up on radar from being recognised by a guard. But at the same time, he was already caught before he got out of bed that day, because there was going to be a guard intelligence operation, and he just happened to be, you know, the patsy or the guy that was picked to drive the van that day by whichever organised crime gang. And so, you know, like, what is fair then? You know, so, I mean, he's got 6.5. Is it fair? Like, you know, should he have got the maximum sentence for carrying out that amount of drugs?
Well, I mean, he certainly knew what he was doing. Like, there's no suggestion. I mean, he does, you know, he accepts that he knew that he was involved in a criminal enterprise. Presumably he knew it was drug dealing. If he's driving a van, he knew it was more than that minimum amount, so he would have known what he faced. And he still took the chance, and he regrets it, and fair play to him, and he's come out and held his hands up, and fair play to him for all of that. But, you know, I suppose you make your choices and you live with the consequences. It's the same as all of us. I have to say, it does, when people walk free on any type of sex crime, when people get suspended sentences, it's jarring, I have to say. I do feel that myself, but I don't think it's as simple as simply blaming a judge for it. But
yeah, well, I suppose sex offences are completely different in a way with Jamie Smith, because people aren't going to be as emotive, particularly about cannabis. Yeah. You know, for whatever reasons, you know, society kind of doesn't really rate it that much of a bad deal. Yeah. Maybe if it was heroin or cocaine, they might have a different viewpoint or whatever. But I mean, at the same time, you know, the organised crime gang he's working for are probably dealing in everything.
100%, and it all has to be underpinned by violence. That's not to say now Jamie Smith clearly wasn't involved in that end of it.
No, and the detective said as much. He said, look, he wasn't the controlling influence in this operation. He was very much the guy at the end of the tentacle or whatever. Like, you know, but like, I mean, when it comes to emotive crimes like rape and child abuse, possession of child abuse material, like like, we see the reaction sometimes on our own social media community, and people, you know, like, just get so fired up about it. And sometimes the only people with a cool head are the professionals that are involved in dealing with the case, whether it's the guards or the judges or the defense solicitors or lawyers and the prosecution people. I mean, these are people who have to be very calm. And, you know, and even within, you know, some people have the view it doesn't matter whether it's one picture or two, but somebody could have, you know, AI generated child abuse. Now, I'm not defending anyone for this, by the way. Yeah. But like, if some people have something that's there's no proof that there was an actual victim, that's going to be put before a judge, and somebody might go, you know, a judge might say, well, I'm not going to accept that, or I am going to accept it. It's at the lower end. I'm giving you 6 months suspended. And then someone who has, I suppose, worse material or hardcore material, or has been shown to distribute it, or has a huge collection of it, like, they have to be at a different level of offending. You can't the same as drugs, possession of drugs can't be just, one size fits all. There has to be a degree of offending and whether someone's a danger to society and whether they're likely to offend again. And in some cases, you can argue that there's no point in locking some people up, not necessarily for sex crimes, but for other crimes, particularly, some kind of financial crimes and frauds, if it's a one-off or, they're not going to do it again, or if it was based on a particular issue at the time. But I suppose some people will try and make that argument in sex offenders' cases, and you'll just have a massive outcry then when that happens.
Honestly, if people engage in the crimes against children, it's hard to see why they shouldn't go to prison. But it's up to the
absolutely, yeah.
I mean, it's but some of that pressure has to come on politicians as well. Politicians can make changes to legislation and enact all sorts of mandatory sentencing, for example. So it doesn't always have to come down to a judge.
But judges don't like mandatory sentencing because it takes it out of their hands. And I mean, there's even sometimes with in a case where people have been sentenced to life for murder, which is mandatory, and judges have absolutely no discretion on that. There's sometimes judges have made comments that, unfortunately in this case I have to sentence you to, and there was one in particular I do remember where somebody had a very peripheral role in a murder, and there was a comment, I think at the time, that person shouldn't necessarily have, it shouldn't have been a mandatory life, but there was no way out for a judge to give a lighter sentence in that case. Now, obviously, the probation board or whatever will take all that into account, and it's more than likely you'll find a person like that will get out a lot sooner than somebody who's committed a more, I suppose, deliberate, committed a more deliberate act of murder with a greater sense of malice and forethought and so on.
Well, I'll give you the other side. Some of these judges live in a bubble as well, and sometimes I do. It's not all of them, and far from all of the time. But there can be moments where they live in a bubble, and you do think you can sit there and think, God, they're just living in a different world than some of the people that come before them. One way or another. So
maybe that's a good thing, that they're not caught up in all the madness that we're stuck in.
maybe it is, but maybe sometimes
it doesn't always work out.
Sometimes maybe it's not as well, So anyway, there we go. We won't solve all these issues, Eamon.
No, but we can try.
We can certainly discuss them in a and that's all we can do. Thanks very much, Eamon.
Always a pleasure now.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.